Greetings from Highlights from the Hill.
Good evening. I will be giving highlights from Sunday's lesson for June 14th, 2026, Lesson 2. We're studying from our summer quarter, Unit 1, Faithful Witnesses Testify to God's Promises. Our devotional reading is taken from Isaiah 49th chapter, verses 13 through 17. Our background scriptures are 1 Samuel, 1st chapter, verses 1 through 28, 2 Samuel, verses 1 through 11, 18 and 19, and the 3rd chapter of 1 Samuel, verses 1 through 18. Our printed text is 1 Samuel, 1st chapter, verses 9 through 20, and verse 25. The key verse. So, in the course of time, Hannah became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She named him Samuel, saying, "Because I asked the Lord for him." 1 Samuel, 1st chapter, verse 20, from the New International Version. Our subject, wishing and hoping and praying. Our lesson aims. As a result of experiencing this lesson, the participants should be able to do the following. Number 1, recognize Hannah's faithful witness through her prayerful longing. Number 2, experience heartfelt vows as honest expression of witness to God. And number 3, cultivate a rich prayer life as an element of living a faithful witness before God. There are 2 outlines for this lesson. The first outline is wishing becomes faith-filled hope. And the second outline is faith-filled hope becomes answered prayers. Now, as we take a look at the biblical context of this lesson, we find that 1 Samuel is the 9th book of the Old Testament, and it was originally written as one book along with 2 Samuel until it was divided into these 2 books during the 3rd century BC. Although its author is said to be unknown, it is believed that Samuel himself wrote the first part of the book and that Nathan and Gad composed the rest according to 1 Chronicles 29th chapter and 29th verse. We also find that Samuel was a prophet, a priest, and the last judge of Israel. He was the one that God used to bridge the era of tribal leadership to the establishing of a centralized monarchy with human kings, and that he was the one to anoint the first 2 kings of Israel, Saul and David. The events recorded in 1 Samuel focuses on these 3 central figures, Samuel, Saul, and David, along with the power of the hand of God, and it covers a period of some 90 to 115 years. Now, in today's lesson, we will see the benefits of the hands of God through the power of prayer, real faith, and worship as an act of obedience to and reverence for God. We will see how Hannah, the mother of Samuel, humbled herself before the Lord and prayed earnestly for a male child. God honored her prayer, and in return, she fulfilled her vow to God by giving Samuel back to the Lord for this unique service to God. Now we'll take a look at that first outline. Wishing becomes Faith-Filled Hope, and it covers verses 9 through 18 of the first chapter of 1 Samuel. I'm going to read those verses from the New International Version, beginning with verse 9. Once, when they had finished eating and drinking in Shiloh, Hannah stood up. Now Eli the priest was sitting on his chair by the doorpost of the Lord's house. In her deep anguish, Hannah prayed to the Lord, weeping bitterly. And she made a vow, saying, Lord Almighty, if you will only look on your servant's misery and remember me, and not forget your servant, but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be used on his head. As she kept on praying to the Lord, Eli observed her mouth. Hannah was praying in her heart, and her lips were moving, but her voice was not heard. Eli thought she was drunk and said to her, How long are you going to stay drunk? Put away your wine. Not so, my lord, Hannah replied. I am a woman who is deeply troubled. I have not been drinking wine or beer. I am pouring out my soul to the Lord. Do not take your servant for a wicked woman. I have been praying here out of my great anguish and grief. Eli answered, Go in peace, and may the God of Israel grant you what you have asked of him. Verse 18, she said, May your servant find favor in your eyes. Then she went her way and ate something, and her face was no longer downcast. Notice here that what should have been a joyous time for Hannah became an agonizing annual event for her. For every year, Elkanah, Hannah's husband, Peninnah, his other wife, and Hannah would go up to worship in the tabernacle in Shiloh, and Hannah would be mocked and ridiculed by Peninnah because of her barrenness. But this time, Hannah had had enough. Deeply distressed, Hannah isolates herself from the rest of the family, goes into the temple, and pours out her heart to God, weeping bitterly. Instead of running from God because of her situation, she turns to God with faith-filled hope. For all of her suffering, all of her distress, all of her pain, Hannah takes directly into the presence of God, where her wishing becomes her faith-filled hope for not just a child, but for a male child. Then notice by verse 11 how Hannah in her prayer first recognizes God for who he truly is, Lord Almighty. She is referencing God's sovereignty and power over all things. All the while, Hannah is being aware of who she is as she refers to herself as your servant. In other words, Hannah's prayer begins by communicating reverence and humility when it comes to standing before a holy God. And as we pray to God, we too must recognize who God is and who we are, as Hannah did, as we go boldly before God to make our requests known unto him. So, Hannah prays, and this prayer of Hannah was so intense and yet silent that Eli the priest noticed how her lips were moving, but no sound could be heard. Therefore, he assumed she had had too much to drink. Hannah, in turn, explained to Eli that her actions were a pouring out of her heart before God, and asked him not to regard her as a wicked woman. And once Eli knew and understood what was going on in Hannah's life, he blessed her and told her to go in peace, as he affirmed her prayer and expressed his hope that God would grant her request. Now, after her talk with God and her blessing from the man of God, we can now see a complete change in Hannah's countenance. For even though her life is the same, even though her status hasn't changed, yet she is no longer sad and downcast. There is no more weeping, and Hannah thus returns to eat. Yes, prayer can change us, and prayer can help us to see what is truly important in life. And just like Hannah, we too can go humbly before God in faith-filled hope, knowing that we too are not just going on our own, but we are going through and by faith in the name of Jesus the Christ. For instead of Eli, Jesus is our advocate. And as we submit our desires to his will for our lives, all the while believing and trusting that God will hear and answer our prayers, we can also have assurance in our faith-filled hope that we too can and will receive the desires of our hearts. Our takeaway from this outline is faith-filled hope still triumphs in our times of pain and of our distress. Now we'll take a look at that last outline. Faith-filled hope becomes answered prayers. And this covers 1 Samuel, first chapter, verses 19 and 20, along with verse 25. Again, I'm going to read those verses from the New International Version. Verse 19 says, "Early the next morning, they arose and worshiped before the Lord, and then went back to their home at Ramah. Elkanah made love to his wife Hannah, and the Lord remembered her. So, in the course of time, Hannah became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She named him Samuel, saying, 'Because I asked the Lord for him.'" And then verse 25 reads, "When the bull had been sacrificed, they brought the boy to Eli." Here we can see this pivotal turning point in the life of Hannah as she goes from wishing to a genuine faith-filled hope. Just look at Hannah. She rises early the next morning, along with the rest of the family, and before they return to their home in Ramah, they worship before the Lord. Even though her prayers was not immediately answered, Hannah had faith. She did not lose hope, and God remembered her. God's remembering Hannah underscores some powerful truths for you and me today. That is, that God is always attentive to, God always sincerely cares for, and God always answers the prayers of his people when their prayers aligns with his will and for his purpose. And as a result of Hannah's faith and her dependence on God, God fulfilled his unique purpose for her life. Because in due time, Hannah became pregnant and gave birth to a son, of whom she named Samuel, meaning I asked the Lord for him. And by giving him this name, Hannah is acknowledging that God's hand was in it, that God, had granted her petition to give her this male child. And then, after Hannah had nursed and weaned Samuel, and because of her faithfulness to God, and because of her integrity in keeping her vow, Hannah and Elkanah brought and offered a bull, a costly symbol of worship and dedication to God, before they brought the boy Samuel to Eli the priest to give him back to God for the service of God. And even today, our faith-filled hope will result in answered prayers for us as well. For God still stands ready to answer our prayers when and if we choose to seek him in faith and in trust. So, the question for us today is, as believers in 2026, what vows are we making to God, promising to do something if only God would hear and answer our prayers? Like Hannah, when we make a vow to God, we must be willing and ready to follow through with our part, especially when God has so graciously given us the desires of our heart. And yet, on the other hand, it is better for us not to make a vow than to make one and break it. Hannah proved herself to be a faithful believer through her personal integrity and trust in God's provisions. She knew that only the Lord was able to answer. And if she was ever going to get that male child, she would need to come before God humbly, wishing and hoping and praying, ready to relinquish her request when God provided him for her. So she prepared Samuel to give him back to the one who had first given him to her. In closing, God is still inviting his children to bring all their dreams, all their hopes, all their expectations, and even their disappointments to him in sincere and honest prayer. For God can take our struggles and our tests and transform them into testimonies to tell others of God's faithfulness toward us and help them to turn to God in their times of need when it seems their hope is fading. Yes, our testimonies can be a reminder to others that God is the only one that is able and capable of fulfilling our delayed hopes and our delayed dreams. Listen, church, because Jesus' blood cleanses us, his grace renews us, his power restores us, and in his presence we are refreshed. We are, as believers, must always be willing to humble ourselves and submit to God's will and purpose for our lives. Then, like Hannah, our wishing and hoping will lead us to prayer and our prayer will then lead us to a surrendered life of worship. For when we turn to God with our deepest desire, when we trust God for His timing, when we trust God's will and way for our lives, like Hannah, we too will find reassurance and peace as we be still to see the salvation of the Lord. For God can and God will still fulfill our delayed hopes and dreams when and if they too align with His will and His purpose for our lives. For God has always rewarded faithful hearts that put their trust in His promises, no matter how unlikely things may seem to us. For God is still in the blessing business for our unwavering faith and our trust in Him. So remember this: we must learn to wait for God as we trust in God, look to God, hope in God, and then just allow God, for He will still hear and answer our wishing and our hoping. Yes, He will hear and answer our prayers. I thank you for listening. Good evening. And I invite you to come and share with us on Sunday morning as we go into this lesson in depth, wishing and hoping and praying.